If you've been following along in our little series on God, you know that we've been looking at some of his attributes together. And we're looking at the communicable attributes right now, the attributes that are true of him in perfection, that he also calls on us to follow. And these because we're in him, because he is in us, these particular abilities should also be manifested in us. Again, not in perfection, but there should be evidence that he is in us because of these things. And the one we're looking at now is truth. Last time we looked at the fact that God is true and that he's faithful. He can never deny himself. He can never disappoint. He's always true. He's the standard of truth. He sets his disciples apart in truth, as we saw in John 17. And he gives us his word, which is true, to go out and proclaim that word to other people, because what we have is the very finality, the completeness of truth that God has revealed to us today, as found in his word and in him. Now, we're seeing that we are also to be manifesting that truth. How are we to live out the truth of God that is in him, that is also should be found in us to a lesser degree? And so I want to look at the book of Ephesians for a little bit. He talks about living out this truth in really two different ways in the same chapter, Ephesians chapter 4. He says, as a result, we're no longer to be children tossed here and there by waves and carried out by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up into all aspects of him who is the head, even Christ. The Lord doesn't want his people to be pushed around like a wave on the sea, back and forth and up and down by all the falsehoods that are around us, all the deceitful schemings, all the trickeries of man and of the devil. He wants us to have a solid grounding in truth. And so he speaks here in verse 15 or verse 14 really, that we have this grounding in him, this truth. And then he tells us to share that truth with others. So not only do we have that truth in and of ourselves because of God's word, but we speak the truth in love. And what he means in this context is the way we help one another in our daily walk and our Christian endeavor is that we speak into the lives of one another truth. Not opinions, not ideas, not conspiracy theories, not what somebody else is saying, but what he has taught us in his word, the word of truth. One of the best ways we can help one another in our Christian life, to be sharing with one another, is to share truth. If they're being deceived, as verse 14, or being led astray, we bring them back by sharing the truth of God's word. But it doesn't have to be only in the context of being deceived or drifting. In our everyday life, just to share the truth of God's word, to testify of the greatness of himself and what he's taught to it, to share what God has taught you in your morning time in the word, to share with one another the greatness of God in our own personal lives. These things are very, very important. So one of the ways that we demonstrate the truth of God is by sharing that truth with one another, speaking the truth in love. But we go over to a few verses down the line to verse 25. We have a little different context here. He says in verse 25, therefore laying aside falsehood, speak truth each one of you with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. This is a little different. Yes, it's very, very important that we share the truth of God with one another, speaking the truth in love. And it's important that we speak both truth and do it in love. That's part of what he just said. So we're speaking truth, and we're doing it with the attitude of love. We're not trying to beat someone down or beat somebody up. We're not being judgmental. We are speaking to people the truth because we love them. And we're doing so with a methodology and a manner of love. We're not being harsh. We're speaking in love. But in verse 25, he's talking a little differently. He's talking here in this context of how we're helping one another once again. but we're also wanting to be very fair, very honest, and very truthful with them in the way we deal with them in life. When he says we lay aside speaking falsehood, that means we're not lying to one another, we're not exaggerating, we're not boasting in ourselves, we're not being false, we're being transparent and vulnerable and true. And we're doing that, we're speaking truth to each one of you with his neighbor. So when we lay aside the exaggerations, the falsehoods, the almost truths that tend to pop into our lives because of our flesh, we lay those aside and then we speak to one another in truth so that we're being honest before one another. This comes in very, very often in our relationships with one another. How do we relate to one another? In truth, transparently, honestly, giving of our true heart to them. This is what God has done for us. This is what we should do for others. And so God is true, and we are to live out that truth.